Hello, my name is Dr. Andy Barrowman, and I am speaking to you today from Idaho in the United States. I wish I could be there with you, but I can't, so I'm going to be giving this presentation from my living room. But I think that one thing that we all have in common, no matter what side of the Atlantic that we're on, is that we all love cows. And what I'd like to do to start my presentation off is kind of give you a roadmap of where I'm going to be going today. There it is. I'll let you look at it for a moment. Then we'll move on. So let's talk a little bit about terminology. OPU is basically ultrasound guided biopsy of the ovarian follicles using a needle. And I'm going to talk a lot more about it. In vitro fertilization is a process in which, it's basically test tube babies, right? You add a sperm and an egg into a test tube, shake them up, and you get a calf. Genomics is that expensive test that your zoetis rep is always trying to get you to run on your cattle. And it tells you, things like her milk yield or her longevity, fertility, stuff like that. Predicted transmitting abilities, those are net merit, milk, protein, daughter stillbirth rate, anything you read on a proof sheet. And now they have genomic predicting transmitting abilities as well. Sex semen, hopefully everyone knows what that is. That just gives us the chance to use semen that is only going to give us heifer calves. Oocytes are the egg cells produced by ovaries. And then the OPU probe holder is a plastic housing that surrounds the ultrasound probe and the other components that you see there on the screen. And I'm going to talk about that more later on in the presentation. So let's move on. Looking back in the past, the main tool in our toolkit has been AI. Now it's almost 100 years old. And since we learned how to freeze semen, we have been using it for the last 60 years. AI is the engine that has driven steady genetic improvement through the selection of super sires that can literally sire thousands, hundreds of thousands of offspring. Now, the disadvantage is that we are limited to the bull side of the equation on this. All the improvement comes through the male side. Synergy is the concept that the combined value and performance of two technologies is greater than the sum of the individual parts. Or in other words, if we take vocals and guitar music and drums and we add them together, we get rock and roll. So as we look forward to where I think we're going to be going in the future, there are 4 technologies that I think are synergistic and are going to play a part in letting us focus on the cow side of the genetic equation as well as the bull. And the advantage is we are going to be able to speed up genetic improvement and take it to the next level. But the disadvantage is that if you don't manage it properly, it can be fairly costly. Doesn't mean it's not worth it. But OPU was invented in 1988, over 30 years ago. So why haven't you heard about it until recently? One word: genomics. OPU was not very attractive in and of itself, and really neither is genomics. It's not until you add the two together that you capture enough value, enough synergy, that it starts making the two attractive to commercial dairies. So why genomics? Oh, look at that. I did it. It's a math formula. I'm sorry. But what I'd like to do is take a moment and explain this. So over here on the left of our formula, we have genetic progress per year. That just means that every year our cows get a little bit better. And over there on the right, we have these 4 variables that control it. Okay, 3 on the numerator, 1 on the denominator. And the first one, genetic variation, it cannot be changed. So we're not even going to talk about it. But accuracy is just the reliability of the trait that we're measuring. So hopefully this looks familiar. This is the proof sheet for Game Day. He's a very impressive sire. You can see right here. And over here on the right, you can see his reliability. Some of these traits are more reliable than others. And that's the accuracy. Now, intensity just reflects how different the parents are from the average cow. So if you're using parents that are in the top 1% or the top 0.01% of the breed, then that is very intense. Generation interval is just the amount of time it takes from a heifer calf being born to when she grows up and produces her own baby heifer calf. In Holsteins, that's about, excuse me, in Holsteins, that's about 22 months. Now, the bottom line is that genomics lets us improve 3 of these 4 variables at the same time. And as you can see from this graph, since 1975, genetic progress per year has kind of been a steady increase. The slope hasn't really changed of this progress hasn't changed until right here in 2009 when genomics were invented. And you can see the dotted line where we should have kept going, but thanks to genomics, the slope gets a lot steeper. In fact, we are doubling our progress per year. And the best part is you're already using it every time. You're already using genomics every time you reach for a straw of commercially available semen. So why OPU? Well, there's the math formula again. OPU lets us achieve progress on the female side of things. And it does it by 2 ways, primarily by doing a massive decrease to the generation interval. In dairy cattle, at least Holsteins, we can usually start breeding them around 13 months of age. But thanks to OPU, we can start producing embryos from 6-month-old heifers. That's cutting off, I usually start around 7. So that's taking 6 months off of the generation interval, taking it from 22 to 16 months. Now, if you look up here in the equation, generation interval is all alone in the denominator. That gives us the largest impact on the equation because its effect is not going to be diluted out by these other variables. So the second way that OPU drives progress on the female side is it gives us more pregnancies per female. We are lucky to get 1 replacement a year from our highest value females. But using OPU, we can get 15 oocytes on average per session, and that ends up being about 5 embryos per session. So 1 heifer can easily produce up to 50 plus calves per year. And that is, we can collect them every 2 weeks compared to the once a month you get for embryo transfer. We can also do it on pregnant animals, and we will really maximize semen efficiency. 1 straw can fertilize 40 oocytes, 40 to 60, sometimes even 75. And we only use typically sex-sorted semen. That way we don't waste time producing steers. And where OPU really shines is by multiplying valuable or rare genetics rapidly. So for those of you that didn't like it when I got all nerdy with that math equation, I'm going to use an equally nerdy analogy. Sorry about that. To try and bring this down to earth a little more. So in January of 2022, the very best iPhone that you can get is an iPhone 13. But you don't have an iPhone 13. You've got this 12 here. Sorry, this isn't a 12. This is a 6. You've got a 6, the iPhone 6. Now, if you breed your iPhone 6 to my iPhone 13, what do you get? Well, a year later, you're going to get an iPhone 7. And every year you repeat the process, an 8, et cetera, on and on until you get to the iPhone 13. But the problem is, by then, the best iPhone is an iPhone 20. So you are always chasing that curve, that what is out there, and it can never quite catch up. The beauty of OPU is it's a shortcut. It lets you upgrade to the iPhone 13 in one step so that you are using the cows of the future. You have the cow milking the cows of the future today. You get to save money on the replacement costs because you don't have to replace the intervening generations of cows. Now, what I'd like to do here is go through the equipment that I use for the OPU process. Right here on your screen, you can see my ultrasound console. It's a BCF mini convex made there in Great Britain. Over here, in this picture, you can see my ultrasound probe holder. It's that white plastic thing. It holds the needle guide right there. This red piece of equipment here is a battery-powered test tube holder. All of these are made by WTA out of Brazil. This is my vacuum pump, also made by WTA. You can see in the top it has test tube warmer. This keeps the test tubes warm while they're waiting to be used. Over here on the right is a picture of my needle guide. And you can see over here, this over here is the needle, that end, and here is a magnification slide that shows the needle up close. And you can see here that I have unattached the needle. You can see how the hose runs through the needle guide. It's hollow. I use a 20 gauge short needle as pioneered by the Brazilians. So let's talk about follicle preparation. I believe that we should be using FSH. Our goal is to improve oocyte recovery and quality. And in an internal study that I participated in through Transova Genetics, we used FSH on heifers, and we found that we recovered more oocytes per heifer and had a better ratio of high quality embryos. Here's some data provided by the American Embryo Transfer Association from their 2020 Statistical Information Committee report. What I want you to focus on is right here. In heifers where no FSH was used, they recovered 2.3 viable embryos, while in dairy heifers where they did use FSH, it was 4.7 viable embryos. So we more than double the amount of embryos that we get when we use FSH, and the grade 1 to grade 2 ratio is a lot higher when we use FSH. So let's go over the OPU process. We start by restraining the animal in a chute, and we give her an epidural, clean her up, introduce the probe into the vagina, bring the ovary over to the tip of the probe, and start guiding the needle into the follicles one at a time while the follicular contents travel through the needle, down through the hose, and into the test tube. And once I've aspirated both ovaries, we take the test tube into the embryologist so that they can begin the searching and processing. Here is a kind of a drawing of what's going on inside the cow. Right here, you can see my left arm. That is inside the cow's rectum. And here in the vagina is the ultrasound probe. You can see that I've reached over by the uterus and I've grabbed that ovary and I've brought it up and placed it right in front of the ultrasound probe. And you can see that my right hand is holding onto the needle guide, and that's advancing the needle into the ovary so that I can start vacuuming the follicles out of that ovary. And then the follicles and the fluid travel down through that hose. Here's a blow up of the oocyte. You can see the follicle, follicular fluid. Here's the needle. Here is the oocyte, and I'm going to try and vacuum it up through that needle. All right, here's a movie that I made about the whole process. Sit back and enjoy. OPU starts by restraining the cow in a squeeze chute. Then we take 2% lidocaine, about 5 cc's, and administer a caudal epidural. I don't want her to feel anything, and I want her to be calm and relaxed and not straining or pushing against me while I am performing the OPU process. You can see her tail is nice and relaxed, all floppy. She's not going to feel a thing back there. Then we wash her vulva, dry it off, get her nice and clean. You can see that her tail has been tied off. It's not really tied, it's just clipped with a spring clip and a bungee cord. Next, I'll grab the probe holder, take some lubrication, get it nice and slippery, lubed up, and insert it into the vagina. I want it to be snug, the tip of the probe holder to be snug up against the cervix. Then I'll take my left hand, insert it into the rectum, evacuate the rectum of manure. Next, I will use my left hand to retract. I usually start with the left ovary, and I guide it over to the tip of the ultrasound probe so that I can see the follicles. I usually do a quick count, and then I begin to aspirate. Now you're going to see a bright white needle coming up from the lower right portion of the screen, and you'll see the follicle draining. I like to see the follicles snapping shut, and the quicker the better. You know, what I want is each follicle to look like a happy little eye that is just winking at me as I drain all the fluid out of it. It lets me know that the line isn't plugged and that I've got good vacuum on my pump. I like the pressure set at about 180 millimeters of mercury. As those things slam close, as those follicles slam close, it just, it's almost mesmerizing to sit here and watch it. And this cow is a great example of a cow that not only produces a ton of follicles, I mean, she probably had at least 20 on this left ovary alone, but also a cow that has responded wonderfully to the follicle stimulating hormone. You know, the ideal follicle is 4 to 9 millimeters, and this cow had about 20 of them. For your reference, those grid squares on the screen there are 5 by 5 millimeters. So she just, you can see they've all been in that range. Like I said, this is about as good as you could hope a response. Unfortunately, not all of them respond this well. And you know, we didn't always used to give follicle stimulating hormone. What that looks like is 1 or 2 large 15 millimeter follicles, you know, a couple of perfect size follicles like the ones you've seen so far. And then the rest are all these tiny little miniature 1 to 2 millimeter follicles, barely bigger than the tip of the needle, make it very difficult to collect. That is not ideal. And the, you know, we didn't stimulate them. The oocyte quality was terrible too. It's a lot better, and you actually, I believe, recover more. Now, this pattern here is what I like to see. I call this the spider web pattern. It's because she has so many ovaries so many follicles packed into that ovary that, and they're all the perfect size. It just looks like a spider web there to me. So that's this is as good a cow as you can collect, right? Hope to collect right here. So when I am done collecting all the follicles on both ovaries, I'll go ahead and take the aspirate or the fluid that has been drained out of all of the follicles, and that gets passed through the window into our clean lab. For my lovely wife, Kristen, who happens to be my embryologist, she takes over from there and processes and cleans and sorts the oocytes. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at the equipment she uses and how she does it. All right, so right here in this photograph right here, you can see her slide warmer, plate warmer. This just keeps all of the media that we use and the search plates warm. This picture here shows our HEPA filter. We want to keep the air in the clean lab filtered. Over here is a water bath. It just keeps test tubes warm while we're waiting to use them, and all the media, liquid media that we use as well. This is probably the most important tool right here. These two tools. This is the microscope. It's got a lighted base. And then this glass thing here, surrounded by the white plastic, is actually a stage warmer. So it keeps the search dish warm, but it's made of glass. It keeps it at 37 degrees Celsius while she's searching for embryos or oocytes through the microscope. Here's the controller. This is the travel incubator that we used. It's battery powered, and it keeps the oocytes at, you guessed it, 37.5 degrees Celsius. The interior of our lab and the collection room where I work, we warm up. They're about 28 degrees Celsius. It's very important to keep the embryos from getting cold. While they're in the clean lab, the embryologist will wash and rinse the aspirate, then put them in a petri dish, look under the microscope, find all the oocytes, put them in another little test tube, and store them in the incubator where they'll be overnighted to the in vitro fertilization lab, ready for them to begin fertilization the next morning. We have a couple of strategies we use to decrease costs. And that is how the oocytes get fertilized. So typically, we do not fertilize every donor by themselves. We pool them together. And you can see over here, well, we'll get up to 40 to 60 oocytes pooled together. Sometimes we've done as many as 75. And the only limit that we have is they have to be collected within 60 minutes of each other. So you can see this is 10 cows that we've collected here. Here are their ID numbers. Over here on the left side of this is the amount of oocytes that Kristen was able to find. And this is how many I counted when I was counting the follicles. And this is how many are going into the fertilization group. So you can see she found 30 on this cow, and the start of this FERT group gets 30. Here she found 16, so that takes the FERT group up to 46, and we close it off and then start the next FERT group. And you can see how many oocytes we found in each of these cows for a total of 47. The point is, the bottom line is that we are saving a ton of money, because instead of paying for 10 fertilization fees, we're paying for 4. And instead of using 10 straws of semen, we're using 4. That's a 60% reduction in our costs right there. So here's a video of Kristen doing her thing. Let's watch it.
Now that I'm done collecting this donor, we have a test tube full of follicular fluid and oocytes. Rigo's going to take that test tube and is going to deliver it over to the clean side of our lab, where my wife, Kristen, who is my embryologist, will clean, wash, sort, and grade the oocytes. The clean and dirty side are separated by a wall with this window that lets us pass samples through to the clean side. The air inside is HEPA filtered, and we don't let anybody from the dirty side come inside without changing clothes first. Now right here you can see Kristen pouring the contents of the test tube through this 100 micrometer filter. This special filter is designed to let everything pass through except the oocytes, which compared to red blood cells and follicular fluid are fairly large. The oocytes are all trapped in the yellow 100 micrometer filter. She'll turn that filter upside down and rinse all the oocytes into that round petri dish resting on her plate warmer. So Kristen's going to take the search dish and move it over the microscope. It's resting on a clear glass heated stage, which lets my light from the microscope shine up through the search dish. That way Kristen can see it while she's hunting for oocytes. And this is what she is seeing through her microscope. She's looking for these round structures. This is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see under a microscope, in my opinion. These beautiful round oocytes surrounded by cumulus cells. Each one of these has the potential to be a newborn calf. And you can see that she's going in with her micropipetter, finding oocytes and transferring them from the search dish into the wash dish. Kristen will make 3 passes through the search dish, making sure she's found all the oocytes. They'll be moved to yet again another wash dish. In that dish, they'll be sorted and graded and then put into a micro test tube full of maturation media. They'll be labeled and then finally placed in our incubator. The incubator is a battery-powered travel incubator that's kept at 37.5 degrees Celsius. It will be overnighted to the IVF lab, where in vitro fertilization process will begin exactly 24 hours after the oocytes were placed in maturation media.
Let's talk about the in vitro fertilization process. We overnight them to the lab 24 hours after they get fertilized. They're placed in an incubator for 7 days. And after 7 days, about 33% of them develop into embryos. They're graded into G1, G2s, G3s. G1s and G2s are frozen and returned to the dairy, where we put them into recipients. This is important. The recips must match the embryo. In other words, a 7-day embryo goes into a recip that had a heat 7 days ago. Now, here is a video of what goes on in the in vitro fertilization lab.
Here are our oocytes at the IVF lab. What you're about to see is a technician add millions of sperm cells into the petri dish through that pipette you just saw on your screen. Now, it's been exactly 24 hours since Kristen packed these oocytes into the incubator and shipped them overnight to the IVF lab. All of those frantically swimming sperm cells that you can see on the screen are trying to find an oocyte so they can fertilize it. Believe it or not, it's a team effort. Together, they will burrow a pathway through the cloud of cells that surround that oocyte, and eventually one lucky guy will get there and fertilize the egg. These fertilized oocytes, or zygotes as they're now called, will be placed inside of an incubator where they will continue to divide over the next 7 days. Then they'll be taken out by technicians, graded, cryopreserved or frozen, returned to the dairy where they can be placed inside the uterus of a recipient.
All right, that pretty much wraps it up. In summary, OPU is a mature technology. It's decades old. But the reason we're talking about it now is the value that's created when you add genomics to the picture. And like I said, you can see the progress. I have added these little dotted lines, which I believe is what is going to happen to genetic progress when we start using OPU in a major way in the dairy industry. I'm really excited about that because, as you can see, the slope looks almost like a rocket taking off. And I believe this is the future. And I believe that this rocket is taking off. And I'm glad to be part of this and be on board. Don't get left behind. Now, OPU requires a veterinarian and an embryologist. You need access to an in vitro fertilization lab. And OPU requires equipment and training. That equipment and training cost me about $46,000. It's roughly 30-something thousand pounds. Now, I would like to thank my team for everything they've done to help me. And with that, I will answer any questions, but not right now. I'll be happy to answer them when we're doing the panel discussion later on down the road. But look at that. I found a cow with a picture of I found a cow with a question mark on her head, so I had to show that. All right, thank you.